with a different kind of presentation today, a little bit different working with Zoom, but hopefully we'll be able to walk through a little bit about how we're doing Chef and specifically Policyfiles with our CI system over at Protege. So as Mendy said, my name is Mendy. I am one of the DevOps folks over at Protege. My background has actually been in QA, so everything that gets deployed gets tested first. We actually found some nice issues with that, so that's one of our big pushes this year. And we have tried to automate everything. It's worked out pretty well so far. Protege is a company that runs an online, a couple online rewards businesses. Essentially, it's like frequent flyer miles for the web. So if you've ever shopped online, searched online, or watched videos, you can always do that through our portal. You get cash back for most of the things you do, and you can use that cash back to get gift cards. One of the nice things that we're seeing the last few weeks has been some of our users have actually written in, and normally they're using these kind of cashback rewards for a little bit extra. You know, some folks are getting some holiday presents, going to Disneyland. We've had people write in that we're helping people, you know, cover things like rent and groceries. So it's been really important for us to make sure that we have a good system that catches issues and make sure that our infrastructure is up and running always. So let's talk about Chef and Jenkins. So one of the things we were trying to do when we started this project about 2 years ago now was how can we make everything repeatable? When we started using Chef, I was pushing all the Chef updates from my laptop or my desktop, and frequently found that, well, some updates were on one computer, some were on another. We frequently found that happens to be that I forget certain flags sometimes. So while something worked the first time, it didn't necessarily work the next time. I had to go back and figure out what I had accidentally forgotten to run. So we sat down and put all that together and ended up putting this all into Jenkins. Jenkins is a CI system. We run it self-hosted in our office. We use Jenkins for a couple reasons. One is that it was a lot easier. It was something that some folks on the team were familiar with already. And it also allowed us to do basically everything that we asked it to. Jenkins, as it goes, isn't the best tool for everything, but it can do everything you ask it to. So that said, even though we're using Jenkins, a lot of the actual code that is written can be run anywhere. It's all Docker-based. So you can actually put this into GitHub Actions, the bucket pipelines, or just about anything else that runs Docker commands. The other nice thing about using Jenkins for this is it has a lot of built-in plugins for alerting into Slack, JUnit testing, which we'll use when we talk about inspec in a moment, and it has a really good logging system. So we can actually look back at every single Chef push we've done the last 2 years and see who did it, what changed, what was running, any errors, and makes it easy for us to do it as we have a distributed team. We're also using Artifactory. We're using the open source Artifactory for this demo, but Artifactory is essentially a file system in the cloud. We run our self-hosted as well. For the demo, we'll be running it in Docker. And the general idea is it allows us to put files somewhere that we can use again later. And we're going to use that for Chef Policyfiles as well. So I'm going to share my screen. And what makes this more fun is we're going to do everything live. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, so let's get started. So all this code is actually in a public repo, which I will share shortly, and it allows us to actually set up and run everything from one script. One of the parts of the project is also to make everything infrastructure as code. So we're using Docker and Docker Compose to create and set up the quote host servers. We're using Jenkins configuration as code to manage the actual Jenkins server. And Artifactory has a really neat API that you can send YAML files to and put together all of the configurations there as well. So we're going to get started.
Can you make the text a little bit bigger on your terminal window?
Yes. Is that better for folks?
Yeah.
Or I can go bigger if needed.
Yeah. Go one
Sorry
more.
about that.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so we've built this to run, we based it on Ubuntu, just something that we're familiar with on the team. And for the most part, it should be pretty straightforward to use any Linux server. We're using Ubuntu out of Amazon, Spot instances, just makes it cheaper. And we have opened up some security groups and ports for my desktop. So we're actually going to clone these, the repository. So the repository has all the pieces we need for actually everything here. It includes the chef cookbooks, the Jenkins configurations, the scripts to set up the actual server, all the configuration as code steps, and the basis for the keys. Okay, so this is the nice part of configurations code. We're actually going to go ahead and make sure that everything is fully up to date before we start running anything. Everything needs to be patched. We're then going to go ahead and install Docker and start setting up the directories for Docker and Docker Compose. One of the other things that we've been working on with the configuration as code is it allows us to actually deploy this whole thing as one Docker image. It has all the plugins, configurations, secrets actually, which we haven't set up in this specific demo, but we use AWS SSM to pull in our secrets into our containers. It also allows us to automatically do incremental updates. So the good folks over at the Docker Hub have a copy of Jenkins. We just pass in a version number and run it. Anything that doesn't work, we roll back another version. It does work, we roll forward. It also allows us to make demo or also, test Jenkins instances so that we can do checks before we deploy to our production Jenkins. So while this is running, we're actually at the part where Docker Compose is running. It pulled down the Artifactory image and set that up, and it pulls down the Jenkins image, which we're going to run a Docker file to go ahead and copy over some files from our local repository, including the, there is a script called plugins.yaml, plugins.txt, and it just allows us to list all the plugins that we're going to need. That includes some stuff for JUnit, it includes the stuff to handle the AWS credentials. It allows us to also put in all the pipeline settings. So it's going to put all that together. Once all that is built, it will also link as a volume the configuration as code directory, and it will let us actually spin that all up as into its own instance and start it up in a moment. So it's in the middle of still creating the instance, but it's actually getting started right now. So 3 minutes ago, this was nothing, and now it's all there. This next step takes a quick moment. It waits for Artifactory to start up properly before it can actually call the Artifactory API. Artifactory has some interesting ways of handling configuration as code, where it needs to actually be set as an API versus a settings file. So we've had to make some extra tweaks there. While it's running, one of the nice things about having one big script for everything is it allows us to actually have a workflow inside of, right now I'm using GitHub, that allows us to go ahead and check all of the scripts before we do any changes. So every time we make a push, it runs the same set of steps that we do for setting up the new server and gives back a result of usually success, and sometimes it fails. So we can go back and take that data and see why it failed and how to tweak it and fix it. The nice thing with GitHub Actions, that also allows us to run other steps, including the Markdown linter, which has found some interesting things in how we're handling Markdown and allows us to make sure that our documentation and examples are quite clear. Okay, so all of that should be up to date now. That the line here for 10 changes is for Artifactory. So it has to switch keyboards right before I demo. Okay. This is now our Jenkins server, larger. The UI is slightly different. We're using a Jenkins configuration for using a different set of style guides. It's mainly just for fun. And also it's a little bit of a cleaner UI, so we've turned it on. Let's see. So this is the Artifactory server. As you can see here, there's currently no artifacts, though we do have the chef repo, which was set up through our configuration, and we'll be using that as well. Jenkins has a user that gets set up automatically by our script. Okay. So we are now logged into the Jenkins server. Okay, so part of what we set up within Jenkins has actually been a set of credentials for AWS, for the chef keys, the knife, knife.rb, and the Artifactory credentials. It also lets us set up the credentials, sorry, not the credentials, what's called a cloud, but we've actually been able to set up that and we'll talk to the Docker host as well. So we can use Docker for our settings. The one step we haven't been able to fully automate for this specific demo is the secrets configuration. The secrets that are in the repository are example, just nonsense data. So we're going to swap over to the server that has the proper credentials. There's integrations for Jenkins configurations code to use Amazon SSM, like credential files, environment variables, but it went a little bit out of scope for this presentation. Okay. So we're going to start with Test Kitchen. Every time we make any changes to our code base, we'd like to trigger it into Test Kitchen. We allow folks to pass in different branches and other settings there to make sure that it will work properly. We also run all that data into JUnit, which will be in a second. Our main environment is actually in AWS and Amazon, so we've moved all our Test Kitchen servers to be built into AWS as well. We actually have our Test Kitchen servers built next to our QA servers and use a lot of the same pieces of the QA environment, and it uses all the same parameters from Terraform. So the security groups, VPCs, subnets, profiles, etc., all identical. So the way we're running the Test Kitchen setup today is through Docker. We're using the Chef Workstation image. The Chef Workstation image allows us to just pull all the dependencies we need for Chef and run it in one little container, and we're done. We'll throw the whole thing away. So there's no cross-contamination, I think, between tests. We know it always runs the exact same way each time. And also, as much as possible, we use the same Chef Workstation version for desktops as well. So we're going to call Test Kitchen. We're running this with the concurrency flag, so we'll run both tests at once. The example cookbook we have using a pretty standard test kitchen, sorry, pretty standard test kitchen file. We just have just the notes of where we want to run it. And we're actually running both with a desktop file and a server file. This is just demo code. I wasn't able to get production credentials on our production servers for this demo, so I'm going to use demo code. So okay, while that's running, we're actually running all of this in Jenkins. So what Jenkins is doing, and the actual steps that we're running are all configurations code as well. So we're running this pipeline. Like I said, we're running this all in a Docker image. So the first couple lines are saying where we want to run it. We add in some parameters of what we want to run. Because this is the first run, those values don't show, but they'll show for subsequent runs as well. Allows us to pass in a branch or a specific policy we want to check on from there. Chef in Chef 15 added the licensing portion of it. So we actually put that environment variable there for testing. We go ahead and check out the cookbook. We run cook style. Allows us to make sure everything is following all of Tim's settings. Well, at some point we'll end up running cook style A and committing it back in, but we don't do that in CI just yet. We have folks do that manually. We go ahead and we use the credentials that we were talking about previously. With test kitchen here, actually pass in those credentials. We run kitchen test. We pass in a policy name if there is one. Otherwise, it does all of them. We always destroy them because no one's going to clean them up afterwards. We run both, and we're going to gather reports with logs in case you need them for later, as well as pulling in the JUnit version of the inspect data for reviews. So, okay, it's all green. That's good. So we're just going to click at this quickly. You can see here, running test kitchen, creating instances, accepting licenses, generating the policy file, and shipping all that code over, installing Chef, doing the same for the other set of servers. All this runs, sets it all up, and gets down to inspec. Inspec here is running our integration tests. Like I said, everything we do gets tested. Server, I think it's more interesting. The server controls here is simply to make sure that we have the correct user set up. We're going to let the root user exist, and then also the Nginx server is created. And if we make a call, we're getting the correct data as well. So in this case, this is for the quote client or desktop server. The user exists, and the server one, we can do the call as well and get the correct value. Because all that is correct, we get those test results, which get shown over here. The test results show that we have 5 passing tests for desktop and 7 for the server. If you click into it, you can actually see what we tried calling and what the responses were. So all our tests passed. Okay, so we're using Policyfiles. Policyfiles allows us to actually go ahead and make sure that the same exact code is shipped to different policy groups in different places. So we have our desktop policy file, sorry, our server policy file. We want to make sure that the same policy file gets shipped out to QA, staging, and production. When we were first started using policy files, we realized that we were basically pushing whatever was currently on our local repo to production, even if it hadn't been fully tested, which we were able to track down and find policy archives, which we'll use here. So the first thing we're going to do is actually going to trigger to create these policy files. One thing I'll note here is we actually have separate jobs for all of this because sometimes we want to do individual steps. We allow folks to go ahead and run just test kitchen on its own. We allow folks to run just the upload steps if they think it's a good place to sort of cut a commit from master. And we also allow you to do the policy upload step separately so that we can actually go run automatically push this into QA, and we'll push the actual policies into production as well once they're ready. So again, this is all configuration as code. This similar thing uses Chef VK because we haven't switched over to the Chef workstation for this yet. It just grabs the branch if it's there, checks it out. There's some interesting logic that we have with specifically Groovy with Jenkins, which simply just goes through and says, okay, go look in the policy file directory for any .rb files. For each one, run chef install. We then create a directory that we run chef export into as an archive. And then we push those values, those files into Artifactory with a build name and number for tagging later. Okay, so we've pushed these Artifactory files. We can now go look at what it looks like in Artifactory. Right, we now have version 1. I'm actually going to show you this again so we can do the demo in a moment. So you can see here that there's the version 1. We have the desktop on the server. It's a TGZ file from the Chef archive step. Artifactory also allows you to actually open up the TGZ file live and take a look and see what's in there. You can actually look and see that our policy file has a run list for the Chef client updater. The name is for server. The cookbook locks for what it needs. The nice thing about using policy file archives is the nice thing about using policy file archives is it actually includes all the artifacts it needs as well. So we can actually run the entire thing with just this one TGZ file. It includes, we have Chef client updater, cron, nginx, etc. And for the desktop one, it should include a few less. This one here doesn't need nginx, so it's a lighter cookbook, lighter artifact as well. But again, it has the same set of things as well as the policy file. Okay, so we're running this twice. So we have 2 versions to use. You can now see there's version 1 and version 2. They both have their own those lock file numbers as well. Our last step here is to push the policies. So I'm going to click build now. Push policy step lets you pass in the parameters for which policy group you want to use. You can pass in if you want to use a specific policy file. It goes ahead, pulls down the files from Artifactory, and runs a similar for loop and runs the chef push archive and pass in the config parameter for the 9RB. Alrighty, that's on me. So we validate what parameter you passed in, and we passed in build provision -1, which doesn't exist. So of course I did the same thing twice. That looks better. Okay, so what this has done is actually pulled down those 2 TGZ files over here from Artifactory. We ran a loop to run the chef push archive for QA for the desktop one and the server one, and cleaned up. We also pass in specific values and say, okay, now that we have 2 versions, we want to push just the server version for production. Now that the server version has been sitting in QA for a whole week, build revision 2 is working. We're going to go build that. And done. That whole process takes 12 seconds. One of the other nice things about using this tooling is we've actually been able to, you can access Jenkins from your phone. So we've been able to just simply fix a commit on our phone, go to the Jenkins site, click a couple buttons, and it goes ahead and makes the policy file for you, uploads it, and within 30 minutes, Chef has fixed the servers for whatever issues there were. Now, there's one last job here which we'll just use. So this is putting all of this together. What this does, we're going to trigger it manually to get it started. What this does is actually it goes ahead and walks through all 3 jobs in order. So it's going to go ahead, let me pull this up here. It simply runs the test kitchen job. It runs the policy, it runs the upload policies to create the archives, and it stores the job result, that number, which will pass into the push policies in a second to make sure that it actually can push that specific revision. Now, the nice thing about this specific one is it runs with a trigger from Git. So if you make changes in Git, it will trigger this again. So we're going to go ahead and make changes and trigger some things. So we're going to change for our server policy file. We're going to change what the response is. So right now, the Nginx recipe here has a content of hello world. Change this to be hello. We're going to commit this straight to master. No, you shouldn't commit stuff straight to master, but our CI tooling is going to make sure that everything's working as expected. So you can actually watch this while it's running and see what's going on. Oh, we got there just in time to see it finish. So while that process is running to create the test kitchen server, to walk through the test kitchen process for the CI tooling, I'm happy to take a few questions if anyone has specific questions about the things we've talked about so far. I'm trying to figure out where Zoom went. It's running the upload policy file step. And it's already going to be into the push policy files. Okay, so that did while it ran. Took 3 minutes, and it went through and verified our entire workflow. Now, this is actually going to be checking, I'll just trigger it now, but it will check Git every few moments. So this will go ahead and pull from open up Test Kitchen to pull our new code base for the change that we made for the Nginx recipe. We'll give us some results in a moment. So while this is rolling, there's a couple things that we've actually added into our production versions of this code. We have a lot of steps actually that run through Slack. So every time something starts, we get a notification it started. If it runs and is successful, we get some happy messages. If it fails, we all get notified as well. It also allows us to know which versions are getting pushed by who and when. So we've been able to keep track of what updates we're getting. Well, this is intentionally surprising. As you can see here, one of the steps in our inspect check is failing. It's looking for this hello world result, and of course we changed it to be hello chef friends. I apologize for the coloring, it's a little difficult on this. But inspect is very unhappy with it and is going to report that into JUnit. And JUnit is going to mark the whole build as unstable. So we can go here and look at the test results and see that there is a failure. Okay, 1 second. Well, lets us know what failed. And we can go fix that quite simply by updating our inspect code. Make sure this works successfully again. Make sure it is the exact same as yeah. Okay, now that our test has been updated, we're going to trigger the CI job again. So you can see here, this is important. Okay, so because test kitchen failed, we're not going to go ahead and do any of the subsequent steps. We're not going to push the policy archives to Artifactory, and we're definitely not going to push them back into the chef server. We'll trigger it again manually instead of waiting. And we'll open up test kitchen again to make sure it works. So one of the nice things also, there's a test result trend. So you can see you went from 0 to 1 failure, but we'll be able to go through and see as this goes down back to 0. Also, as I mentioned, we actually store those log files. So you can look at what happens here. In this case, this is the last one that ran, and there's an instance failure. We can also go back into the server one and get the entire log file and get more data about where it failed. So part of the fun part about using Jenkins or any other CI system is this all runs in the background after I push a commit. Gives me time to make coffee, work those out of folks. When you're running a demo and you're trying to show Test Kitchen, apparently it runs slower than you'd expect it to. Okay, so it's going to finish this up in another minute and a half. Okay, that looks a lot better. We now have that checkbox for the body that's there. Wait for it to finish up. So now Test Kitchen is much happier with whatever we've done. The test result is there. It's gone back down to 0 failures, which has allowed us to go ahead and start the other upload policies as well. it's now up to push policies, and this will be done shortly. And now our code is now on the Chef server. And everything's green again. Okay, so that's our general overview of how we're using Jenkins with all our tooling here. And we can actually put the URL here for the repository. And there's a decent amount of documentation in the README as well. So hopefully you should be able to roll through and set this up on your own if you want to take a look on how this works. It's MIT licensed, so feel free to play with it as you wish. And if you have any questions later on, I'm happy to just grab anything off of the issues on the repository and work things out there as well. Okay. Are there any questions? You can either put it in chat or unmute yourself, whichever looks better for you.
Yeah, I had one actually. So like, was this like this whole workflow is super slick, right? Is it something that you built specifically for Policyfiles, or is it automation that you migrated from roles and environments? Is it net new kind of stuff? That way?
It's a mix. Well, a lot of this is Policyfile specific, but not necessarily, and we haven't, well, we actually started by using roles and environments when we started building into Chef. Quite quickly, we found out about Policyfiles and decided to go with Policyfiles instead, mainly because we weren't keeping track with each other on what environment or role updates we had done. And this was before we actually had set up CI. So by switching over to Policyfiles, it became simpler for us to know what was going where. And now that we had a decent CI system that was going to be able to handle this for us, we were able to go ahead and automate this. Now that we had Policyfiles, which make it clearer to know what was going where, we were able to go ahead and set this up for us into CI instead of being done by local development or local developers' machines. It's actually at a point now where I haven't yet put my Chef credentials on my new laptop. Everything's handled by CI. The workflow itself, I think, can be translated to roles and environments quite simply. The logic here is just Policyfile specific because that's what we're using. But I think a lot of the, instead of being, Chef push Policyfile, it's a lot of the nice upload role or environment. And also we're more specific about what we upload. So we make sure we say, okay, we're uploading this policy file to this group. Sorry, Matt and I have had a couple of conversations about roles and environments versus policy files. So I will put it this way. You can use this workflow for roles and environments. The folks that have suffered through this prefer policy files. If anyone wants to try to get it set up with policy file with roles and environments, leave a comment or a pull request. I'm definitely happy to let you do that, and we'll take a look at it. Anyone else?
Mendy, this is Ilya from Protege.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. It was helpful. I just have one question or suggestion, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
The very first command that you ran that installed a bunch of stuff, so it was going for a couple of minutes or so. So my question is, do you know if it would be possible to make it show the progress, like how many percent it finished? So because I was looking at it and I wasn't sure, would it go for 10 minutes, for 15 minutes? So it would be helpful to see how much time is left of progress.
Sure. Well, I haven't looked into that much because it's actually just using apt-get install. Apt-get install. So you can go ahead. I don't know if they have a progress bar option, and for the most part, it's just simply making sure that the instance is up to date before making any changes. So you could add something that does progress. I can tell you right now that it takes about 3 minutes to run the whole script. That said, this should be a one-time thing where you set this up, you set up the instance and it just works. And you don't have to run that specific steps to begin with. But we can take a look at that as well.
Thank you.
Make a note for later.
I have a question.
Sure.
I joined a little late. Sorry, it's 6 a.m. here in Australia.
No
After
worries.
the artifacts are built in Jenkins and pushed into Artifactory, is there a separate CI/CD pipeline for promotion, or do you have just a single production environment? You know, like you know, when you push the when you assign policy files to a particular policy group, where does that happen?
Sure. So I'm sorry, I left my Zoom controls here again. Oh, I'm still sharing. Excellent. Okay, so when you actually run the push policies, there's a policy group option,
Ah,
and you can then there's a policy name here. So there's an interesting logic where essentially, let me pull this up because also because I can't remember offhand how this exactly is worded.
I looked at the wrong script.
Okay, so when we run the download from Artifactory, we pass in this policy name and a star. So if there's an actual value, it'll say server star.tgz, which pulls down the server. If it's an empty string, it basically ends up being /star.tgz, and we'll upload all of the policy files for that specific build revision.
Okay.
And actually, with Matt's cookbook is actually one of the ones I was trying to use as an example repo. That said, I had some issues with his way of setting up. So one of the one of the things that we have with our policy files is they get run alphabetically. His depend on a base file, a base policy file, which needs you to run the base policy file first, and then the other policy files, which were, I think, one started with an A and one was something else that was, I think, started with a B in some of your example policy file repos. So technically, you can actually pass in any cookbook that you have there. At our office, we have a few different cookbooks that we're able to pass in, and that's probably why when you actually store it in in Artifactory, we have the cookbook name here as well, so you can split them out by which cookbook they were built for.
Cool. Yeah, I find the promotion of policy files into policy groups is usually a lot thornier than what you have here, because it involves like change review boards and and promotion windows and things like that. But you're lucky.
So we don't currently have a change review board. It's basically me that says, okay, we're going to go ahead and merge this and run this.
Right.
Which has made things a little simpler.
But it is nice to keep it separate.
You're saying the promotion and the...
Yeah, the promotion separate.
Yeah, that way we actually make sure that whatever we have running is running. Whenever we push to production, it's running for usually a couple of days in QA before we go ahead and make any of those changes into production. But if need be, we'll push things to production instantly. And sometimes we'll even have to push things to production before it gets to QA, though we don't like that. It's usually more of a spelling mistake or a tested configuration that we ran through in test kitchen a bunch of times, and we know will work as expected. So not really ideal. That's also why we have the test kitchen. That's why there's 3 different jobs and then the one CI/CD job. This way we have folks who run test kitchen on their own branches. We can get an idea of what's going on. Jenkins also has an idea of a multi-branch pipeline, which will essentially run tests. You can set it up to be for every branch that exists in a repo, run these actions. So you can set it up that says, okay, anytime any commit happens in any branch in this repository, run test kitchen and get a result. So that way it'll happen automatically for developers. We've chosen not to do that currently. We prefer to do just on the master branch, or folks can go in and put whatever branch they'd like into there. That's mainly because we encourage users to do their test kitchen runs locally on their machines. One of the reasons for that is when you run our test kitchen code, our kitchen file labels the server with whatever your desktop name is. So we get the host name, and if we see, we actually have a job that runs every Saturday night at midnight. I have a repository somewhere, I'll find and post it as well. It just runs in Amazon, finds anything that has the test kitchen name and just deletes it. So we've had orphan test kitchen servers that were running for a while. They're spot instances, so doesn't cost a lot, and sometimes they get moved up by AWS anyway, so this way you just go and say, okay, no one should be working Saturday night at midnight. If you have a test kitchen server, it is not deleted. One of the reasons we did that also is when we were first starting, what's interesting is when you run a suite, if you change the name of a suite, Test Kitchen no longer knows about that suite. So it no longer knows to delete those instances. So we had to add that in as well. Anyone else?
Cool. Anybody else have any questions? All right, I guess we'll call it. Thank you so much. That was super interesting. Lots of really cool stuff there. Thanks again to everybody else for coming along. We'll post the recording in the next couple of days. Join us next week for a talk from Nick on Chef 16, and we will see you then. Thank you. Bye.